Welcome back to the channel. If you believe that true strength isn't just about what you can show on the outside, but what you carry on the inside, then you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because the story we have today is a powerful reminder that you can never, ever judge a book by its cover. Now, let's begin. The Golden Dragon Dojo wasn't one of those flashy, commercialized McDojos you see in strip malls, squeezed between a nail salon and a discount mattress store. No, this place had a soul. It was tucked away in an older part of the city, a converted warehouse with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and floors made of polished, aging oak that had absorbed decades of sweat, effort, and the occasional tear. The air inside was thick with the scent of discipline, a mix of wood polish, clean GI uniforms, and that faint, metallic tang of pure exertion. Posters of legendary martial arts masters from a bygone era adorned the walls, their gazes stern and knowing, as if they were silently judging every student's form. This was a place of respect, of tradition. It was run by Master Tanaka, a man in his late 60s, who moved with the deliberate, quiet grace of a river. He was a third-generation sensei, and he valued humility and spirit above all else. His students were a mixed bag, as they always are. There were the eager teenagers, clumsy but full of heart. There were the working professionals, seeking an escape from their 9-to-5 grind and a way to stay in shape. And then there was Kevin. Kevin was, to put it mildly, a peacock in a monastery. At 24, he was the dojo's star pupil. He was blessed with natural athleticism, a chiseled physique that he worked on just as hard at the gym as he did at the dojo, and a charisma that could be charming when he wanted something but usually curdled into arrogance. A few months ago, he had earned his black belt. And that's when the real trouble started. For Kevin, the black belt wasn't a symbol of a journey's beginning, a mark of responsibility. It was a crown. It was a license to strut. He wore it like a king wears ermine, and he expected the appropriate level of reverence. His movements, once precise and powerful, became showy and extravagant. He'd add an unnecessary spin to a kick, a loud, guttural kai to a simple block, all for effect. He wasn't just practicing martial arts anymore. He was performing it, and he needed an audience. The other students tolerated him, mostly because he was undeniably skilled. He could outspar, outpunch, and outkick almost anyone in the city in his weight class. But they also kept their distance, sensing the cold, hard stone of ego where a humble heart should have been. And every evening, moving through this world of controlled violence and spiritual discipline, was another man. A man who was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. His name was Samuel. Samuel was the dojo's janitor. He was 62 years old, with a close-cropped crown of graying hair and deep, kind eyes that seemed to hold a quiet history. He was a tall man, but he had a way of moving that seemed to shrink him, to make him take up less space. He would arrive every evening just as the advanced class was winding down, his presence announced only by the gentle squeak of his cart's wheels. He never spoke unless spoken to, and his replies were always soft, brief, and polite. "Yes, sir. Excuse me, son. Have a good night." He moved with an economy of motion that was, in its own way, a form of art. When he mopped the floor, it wasn't the frantic, sloppy pushing of a man rushing through a job. It was a smooth, flowing dance. His back remained perfectly straight, his shoulders relaxed. The mop head would glide across the wood in perfect, overlapping arcs, leaving a glistening, clean surface in its wake. When he lifted a heavy trash bin, he didn't grunt or strain. He bent his knees, kept his core tight, and rose in a single fluid motion, as if the bin were weightless. It was a form of grace that no one ever noticed. To them, he was just the old black janitor, part of the background, a fixture, like the water fountain or the shoe rack. He was the man who cleaned up their sweat, who wiped down the heavy bags they'd spent an hour punishing, who made the place clean and ready for them the next day. They saw his function, but they never saw the man. Kevin, in particular, saw him as little more than a piece of furniture that occasionally moved. In the beginning, he didn't acknowledge Samuel at all. But after getting his black belt, Kevin's ego needed a bigger stage and a wider audience. He started to notice the quiet janitor, and in the way a bored cat notices a mouse, he decided to play. It began subtly. A condescending smirk as Samuel cleaned a mirror Kevin was preening in. A deliberately misplaced piece of gear that Samuel would have to walk around. Then came the comments, always cloaked in a thin veil of fake concern. "Watch your back there, Pops," Kevin would say, loud enough for others to hear. "Wouldn't want you to throw it out?" Samuel would just nod, his expression unreadable, and continue his work. "Thank you for the concern, son." Sometimes Samuel would pause his work for a moment, leaning on his broom in the wide doorway, watching the students practice their katas. He wasn't staring, just observing. His gaze was calm, distant. Kevin, however, interpreted this quiet observation as yearning. He saw it as the longing of a weak-old man wishing he could be like him, a mighty black belt. The idea amused him. It fed his already bloated sense of superiority. And the cat decided it was time to poke the mouse. "You know, they have seniors' water aerobics down at the community center," Kevin said one evening, stretching theatrically near where Samuel was wiping down the windows. "Might be more your speed." A few of the younger students snickered. The older ones shifted uncomfortably. Samuel just kept wiping, his reflection moving calmly across the glass. "I'm sure they do," he replied, his voice a low, even rumble. But Kevin wasn't satisfied. The lack of a reaction was infuriating. He wanted to get a rise out of the old man, to make him flinch, to force him to acknowledge his own lowly position in the presence of the dojo's champion. The pestering became a daily ritual. He'd accidentally kick a pad in Samuel's direction. He'd leave his sweaty GI on a bench, forcing Samuel to pick it up. He started calling him Chief, an old-timer, dripping with condescension. And through it all, Samuel remained a sea of tranquility. He would sidestep the flying pad without looking, pick up the GI without a word, and absorb the condescending names with a quiet, unshakable dignity. This went on for weeks. The tension in the dojo grew. Students started trying to finish their workouts and leave before Samuel arrived, just to avoid the uncomfortable spectacle. They felt a mix of pity for the janitor and fear of Kevin, speaking up against the dojo's golden boy was a risk nobody was willing to take. Master Tanaka, for his part, was often in his office during these final hours of the day, dealing with bills, scheduling, and the business side of running the dojo. He saw snippets, heard whispers, but never witnessed the full, relentless campaign of disrespect Kevin was waging. The escalation reached its peak after Kevin won a small regional tournament. He came into the dojo the following Monday with a gaudy gold-plated trophy and an ego that could barely fit through the door. He spent the entire class recounting his victory, exaggerating the prowess of his opponents to make his own triumph seem grander. That evening, as Samuel was quietly emptying the trash cans, Kevin cornered him. He was buzzing, high on his own glory, and he had a brilliant idea. "Hey, Samuel," he said, using his name for the first time, which was somehow more insulting than the nicknames. "I've been thinking. You're always watching us. You must be a little curious what it feels like, right?" Samuel paused, his hand on the lid of a trash can. He looked at Kevin, his eyes placid. "I'm just doing my job, son." No, I get it," Kevin said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's got to be boring, just cleaning up. How about it? Tomorrow evening, you and me. We'll put on some gear, get on the mat. I'll take it easy on you, of course. Just a little light spar, for fun. Let you feel the warrior spirit." He said it loud enough for the half-dozen remaining students to hear. It was the ultimate act of condescension, framed as a generous, charitable offer. The great black belt will lower himself to play fight with the humble janitor. It was a power play designed to humiliate Samuel whether he accepted or refused. A heavy silence fell over the dojo. The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. Everyone stared, waiting for Samuel's response. Samuel looked at the eager, arrogant face of the young man in front of him. He let out a slow, quiet sigh. "No, thank you, Kevin," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "My fighting days are long, long over. I'm just here to clean." Kevin's face tightened. He had expected the refusal, but he was counting on it being fearful, timid. Instead, it was just final. It was a simple statement of fact. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. "What's the matter?" Kevin pressed, a sneer creeping into his voice. "Scared you might break a hip? Come on, it'll be a bit of fun." "My treat." "I said no," Samuel repeated, his voice losing none of its calm. "Please excuse me. I have work to finish." He made to move past Kevin, but the younger man shifted, blocking his path. The air crackled. This was no longer a joke. It was a confrontation. "You know, that's the problem with your generation," Kevin said, his voice low and venomous. "No fire. No spirit. You see a challenge, and you just roll over. It's pathetic." For the first time, a flicker of something moved in Samuel's eyes. Not anger. Not fear. It was something closer to pity. He looked at Kevin, shrewdly looked at him, and saw the vast, empty chasm of insecurity that all the arrogance was trying to fill. "My generation had its own challenges, son," Samuel said quietly. "You have a good night now." He stepped around the fuming black belt and continued his work, leaving Kevin standing there, humiliated by the utter lack of deference. Kevin's fists clenched at his sides. The mouse hadn't just refused to play, it had completely ignored the cat. And the cat's pride was deeply, deeply wounded. He vowed in that moment that he would make the old man spar. He would break him. He would force him onto the mat and expose him as the weak, feeble old man he was. The fun and games were over. The next few days were unbearable. Kevin was relentless. He abandoned all pretense of subtlety. He openly mocked Samuel in front of entire classes. He'd be demonstrating a kick and say, "Now you have to commit to the technique. You can't be timid. You can't be scared like an old man who's afraid to get on the mat." He'd leave puddles of water on the floor from his water bottle, accidentally, right in Samuel's path. He'd talk to the other students about cowardice and false humility while staring directly at the janitor. It was a psychological war, and Samuel was his only target. Samuel, to his credit, remained an island of calm in Kevin's manufactured storm. He continued his work with quiet diligence. But the other students could see the toll it was taking. There was a new weariness in Samuel's eyes, a slight slump in his usually perfect posture. He was enduring it, but it was a heavy burden. The breaking point came on a Thursday. It was late. The beginner and intermediate classes were long gone. Only the advanced students remained, along with Master Tanaka, who had been observing the class that evening, a rare occurrence. Kevin had been particularly brutal. He had spent the last 10 minutes of class using Samuel as a talking point for a lecture on the warrior mindset. "And if you let fear rule you," Kevin was saying, puffing out his chest as he paced the mat, "you'll end up old and full of regret. You'll be on the sidelines of life, cleaning up the messes of real warriors." He didn't look at Samuel, but every single person in the room knew who he was talking about. Samuel was by the door, quietly polishing the brass handles, his back to the class. The air was so thick with tension, you could have cut it with a knife. Master Tanaka, who had been sitting in a meditative seiza position, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the room like a razor. "That is enough, Kevin." Kevin stopped, surprised. It was the first time Master Tanaka had ever checked him. "Sensei?" I was just making a point about, I know what you are doing, Tanaka said, his eyes unblinking. It is not the way of this dojo to disrespect an elder. Kevin's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. To be reprimanded in front of everyone. And for what? For a janitor? He turned his glare on Samuel's back. This was all his fault. With all due respect, Sensei, Kevin said, his voice dripping with false deference. I was merely extending an invitation to him. A friendly offer. To spar. For fun. To include him. If he feels disrespected, it's only because he is a coward. The word hung in the air. Coward. Everything went still. Samuel stopped polishing the handle. For a long moment, he didn't move. His back was still to the room. Then, very slowly, he placed the polishing cloth on top of his cart. He turned around. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. Tired in a way that went bone deep. A weariness that came from decades of seeing the same foolish pride, the same youthful ignorance, play out time and time again. He let out a long, slow sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. It was the sigh of a man who was about to do something he had long hoped he would never have to do again. He put his hands together and gave a short, respectful bow. But he wasn't bowing to Kevin. He was bowing to Master Tanaka. And then the strangest thing happened. Master Tanaka, the stoic, unshakable sensei, shot to his feet. His eyes were wide, his face pale. And he returned the bow not as a sensei to a janitor, but as a student to a master. It was a deep, reverent bow, filled with a shock and deference that stunned everyone in the room. What in the world was going on? The atmosphere changed instantly. The cocky, arrogant energy that Kevin had cultivated evaporated, replaced by a heavy, almost sacred silence. Samuel straightened up. He looked at Kevin, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't placid or pitying. It was focused. It was like looking into the calm, dark depths of the ocean. "All right, son," Samuel said. His voice was different. The soft, gentle rumble was gone, replaced by a quiet authority that vibrated in the air. "You wanted to spar. Let's spar." Kevin was momentarily speechless, thrown off by the bizarre interaction between Samuel and the sensei. But his arrogance quickly flooded back in to fill the void of confusion. He had won. He had finally broken the old man. A triumphant, cruel smirk spread across his face. Finally. "Don't worry, Pops. I'll be gentle." "You don't need to be," Samuel said, his voice flat. He walked towards the mat. He didn't bother with stretches or warm-ups. He didn't remove his gray janitor's overalls or his worn-out work boots. He just stepped onto the training floor, his posture suddenly different. The slight, weary slump was gone. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, his presence suddenly filling the room. He didn't look like a janitor anymore. He looked like a mountain. The remaining students scrambled to the edge of the mat, their hearts pounding. They knew they were about to witness something unforgettable. They just didn't know what. Master Tanaka stood by the wall, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of profound gravity. Kevin bounced on the balls of his feet, shaking his arms out. "Ready when you are, old-timer." He adopted his fighting stance, a flashy, wide posture he'd copied from a movie. Samuel didn't adopt a stance at all. He just stood there, his hands loose at his sides, his feet planted shoulder-width apart. He looked like a man waiting for a bus. "Begin." Master Tanaka called out, his voice strained. Kevin exploded into motion. He was a blur of white, launching a textbook roundhouse kick aimed straight for Samuel's head. It was a beautiful kick, fast, powerful, with perfect form. It was the kind of kick that had won him his trophy. And it hit nothing but air. Samuel hadn't blocked it. He hadn't dodged it. He had simply not been there. At the last possible millisecond, he had taken a single, 6-inch step back and to the side, and the kick whistled past his ear with a sound like ripping canvas. Kevin's leg overextended, and he stumbled slightly to regain his balance. It was so subtle, so minimalist, that for a second it looked like Kevin had just missed on his own. Kevin scowled, recovering quickly. He flowed immediately into a three-punch combination, a jab, a cross, another jab, all aimed at Samuel's face. The punches were like pistons, blaring with speed. Again, Samuel's response was baffling. He didn't raise his hands to block. He just moved his head. A slight tilt to the left, and the first jab slid past his cheek. A slight lean back, and the cross grazed the air in front of his nose. Another tilt to the right, and the final jab met empty space. His feet had not moved. It was like watching a cobra weave away from a mongoose's attack. It was hypnotic. Kevin felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. This wasn't right. The old man wasn't fighting back. He wasn't even defending himself in any way that made sense. He was just avoiding. And he was doing it with an unnerving, almost insulting level of ease. "Fight back, old man," Kevin snarled, his frustration mounting. He lunged forward, abandoning his clean technique for raw aggression. He threw a flurry of wild, powerful hooks and haymakers, trying to overwhelm Samuel with sheer force. What happened next was the most surreal thing anyone in the dojo had ever seen. Samuel moved. He stepped into the storm. As Kevin's right hook came flying, Samuel flowed with it, using his left hand not to block, but to gently cup. Kevin's elbow guiding the punch on its way, adding the slightest bit of momentum, so Kevin spun himself slightly off balance. As the left hook followed, Samuel's right hand met Kevin's bicep, redirecting the blow downwards. He wasn't fighting. He was a conductor, and Kevin's limbs were his orchestra. He parried, he guided, he redirected. He used Kevin's own furious energy as a weapon against him. Every punch Kevin threw only served to pull him further off balance. Every kick he launched was met with a simple, almost lazy-looking leg shift that caused him to land awkwardly. The students watching were mesmerized. Their understanding of martial arts was being completely deconstructed. They were used to seeing hard blocks, powerful counters. This was something else entirely. This was a physics lesson. It was effortless. Samuel's face was a mask of utter concentration, but his body was completely relaxed. He wasn't even breathing hard. Kevin, on the other hand, was a mess. His face was beet red, slick with sweat. His perfect hair was matted to his forehead. His powerful Kai eyes had turned into frustrated grunts. He was swinging at a ghost, a phantom that was always just outside his reach, a phantom that was somehow making him punch and kick himself into exhaustion. He felt like he was drowning. The humiliation was a hot, burning fire in his chest. He was the champion. He was the black belt. And this janitor was making him look like a clumsy first-day novice without laying a single finger on him in aggression. Finally, rage overtook him completely. All technique, all training, vanished. With a guttural roar, he lunged forward, throwing a wild, desperate overhand right, pouring every ounce of his strength and frustration into one last knockout blow. This time, Samuel didn't just redirect. As the punch flew towards him, Samuel's feet remained planted. He swayed his torso back, letting the punch sail harmlessly over his shoulder. And in that single fluid motion, as Kevin was completely overextended and off balance, Samuel brought his right hand up. He didn't punch. He didn't chop. He gently placed his open palm flat against the center of Kevin's chest, and he pushed. It wasn't a hard push. It was barely a push at all. It was more like a firm suggestion. But it was delivered at the precise, perfect moment, hitting Kevin's center of gravity when he had absolutely no foundation. The effect was astonishing. It was as if Kevin had been hit by a freight train. His feet left the ground. The air exploded from his lungs in a massive whoosh. He flew backward, not stumbling, but airborne, for a good 5 feet before crashing onto the mat with a sickening thud that echoed through the silent dojo. He lay there, flat on his back, the wind completely knocked out of him. He stared up at the ceiling lights, his chest heaving, his mind reeling in utter, complete disbelief. He hadn't been beaten. He had been dismantled, effortlessly. The spar, if you could even call it that, had lasted maybe 90 seconds. Samuel stood over him, not with a look of triumph, but with that same deep, sad pity from before. He hadn't broken a sweat. His janitor's uniform wasn't even wrinkled. "You have a strong body, son," Samuel said, his voice returning to its normal, gentle rumble. "And good spirit. But your foundation is built on sand. You fight what's outside. You have never learned to fight what's inside." He looked down at the wheezing, humiliated young man. "The belt you wear," Samuel said, gesturing to Kevin's black belt, which had come undone and now lay askew across his stomach, "is a circle. It is meant to remind you that learning never ends. You think you have reached the end, but you haven't even found the beginning." And with that, he turned. He walked off the mat, the soft scuff of his work boots the only sound in the cavernous room. He went back to his cart, picked up his polishing cloth, and went back to shining the brass handle on the door as if he had just taken a short water break. The room was frozen in a state of collective shock. The students stared, their mouths agape, first at the defeated champion on the floor, and then at the janitor. They were looking at him, but they were not seeing a janitor anymore. They didn't know what they were seeing, but they knew it was something extraordinary. Kevin finally managed to sit up, coughing, his face a mask of shame and confusion. He looked at his sensei, his eyes pleading for an explanation for the impossible thing that had just happened. Master Tanaka walked slowly to the center of the mat. He looked around at the stunned faces of his students. His expression was stern, but also filled with a kind of awe. "For years," he began, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have taught you kicks, punches, blocks, and forms. I have taught you discipline and respect. I thought I was teaching you the way of the warrior." He paused, and his gaze shifted to the man quietly working by the door. "I have failed," Master Tanaka said, the admission stunning his students into an even deeper silence. "Because for all my teaching, none of you, not once, learned the most important lesson, to see. You looked, but you did not see." He took a deep breath. "That man," he said, his voice thick with emotion, as he pointed a trembling finger toward Samuel, "is the greatest martial artist I have ever known. He is the reason this dojo exists. The man you called Pops, the man you called a coward, the man you saw as nothing more than a janitor, is Master Samuel Henderson." A few of the older students gasped. The name was a legend, a ghost story whispered among high-level martial artists, a name from the old days. Master Tanaka continued, his voice now filled with reverence. "When I was a young man, a boy of 16, my own master, the founder of this dojo, would speak of his teacher, a man of impossible skill and profound humility, a prodigy who achieved the rank of 10th Dan in Kyokushin karate by the time he was 30, a feat unheard of. A man who won every competition he ever entered, not with flash, but with an economy of motion that baffled all who saw it. But this man," Tanaka said, his eyes now locked on Samuel, "grew disillusioned. He saw the art being corrupted by ego, by the hunt for trophies and belts. He believed the spirit of karate was being lost. And so, 40 years ago, at the height of his power, he vanished. He gave up his titles, his fame, his legacy. And he just walked away. My master searched for him for years, but never found him. He believed he had died." Master Tanaka turned to face Samuel directly. He walked off the mat, stood before the janitor, and bowed lower and more deeply than any of his students had ever seen him bow before. It was a bow of ultimate respect, of a student to a grandmaster. "I am shamed, Henderson Soak," Tanaka said, using the highest honorific title, "to have you in my dojo all this time, washing my floors, and to be so blind." Samuel finally stopped his work. He turned and placed a gentle hand on his old student. "Rise, Tanaka-san," Samuel said kindly. "There is no shame. I came here seeking quiet, not reverence. I am just Samuel." He looked past Tanaka, at the young, broken man still sitting on the mat. "The boy, Kevin, he has spirit. He will be a good martial artist one day, after he learns that the toughest opponent is the one in the mirror." The final, shocking truth settled over the room. They had been in the presence of living history. A legend had been walking silently among them, mopping their floors, cleaning their toilets, enduring their disrespect, and not a single one of them had seen him. Samuel gave a small, weary smile to the stunned room. He picked up the handle of his cleaning cart. "Well," he said, his voice once again just the quiet, humble rumble of the janitor, "these floors aren't going to mop themselves." And he pushed his cart out the door, its gentle squeaking echoing in the profound, deafening silence he left behind. What do you think is the biggest lesson Kevin learned that night on the mat? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more content that makes you think. We appreciate every single one of you. Stay humble, stay strong, and we'll see you in the next video.